So UFC Fight Night Vegas, Royval versus Kape is this weekend. And guys, we're finally here. The last UFC event for this year. It's also going to be one of the last UFC events that we have for a little bit of a while, in accordance to what we've gotten accustomed to, because we aren't going to have another UFC event until the next 3 weeks after this. So almost a month, a little bit of a gap. But this is going to be a good one. At least the main event is. It's not going to be as packed of a card as the last two have been. However, we still got some exciting stuff to look forward to. Let me get into my predictions. And let's begin with the opener of Jamie Lynn Hort versus Teresa Bleda. This matchup, I think it's going to be interesting, but not crazy. I think Jamie Lynn Hort wins by decision. I just think that overall, once again, just a more well-rounded fighter. I think that she'll be a little bit more prepared in this matchup. I think Teresa Bleda very much could be a decent counter for her, just stylistically speaking, especially when it comes to the striking. But I'm going to be a bit interested to see that. But I do think Jamie Lynn Hort is going to be the one to get it done by decision, 29-28, in a more or less kind of back and forth fight. Moving on, we have Alan Fry Jr. versus Guilherme Pat, both of which are debutants, both of which are going to be trying to really make a statement in their UFC performance. I'm going with Guilherme Pat in this one. Just think that he's going to be the one that just is going to be a little bit more aggressive in this fight. I think that aggression is going to go a long way. I think that he's going to basically be able to dictate the pace a little bit better than Fry Jr. And then, if not be able to get that decision, I actually think that depending on how good Fry Jr. is able to handle it, that Pat might even manage to get the finish in the third round. As you can see, due to them both being debutants, the UFC haven't even updated their pictures as yet. But it should be a decent scrap from them both. Moving on to the next fight. We have Melissa Croden versus Luana Santos. This fight will be also pretty interesting. We have a lot of women's fights coming up on this one. This one's going to be in the women's bantamweight division. I think Luana Santos gets this one done. I think Santos has the better striking and the better grappling defense. I think that she'll be able to overwhelm Croden a little bit in this matchup. I do think that Santos gets the finish. I say she gets the finish in the second or third round. But I think that this one is going to probably be a bit of a barn burner. Both fighters are pretty skilled, or at least for where they are in their careers currently. And I definitely believe that Santos will be able to get that to dub over. Now, moving on to heavyweight bouts, we have Sean Sharif versus Steven Asplund. I know that Sharif is coming off of a loss, but I do still think that he'll be a pretty decent challenge for Steven Asplund. With the heavyweight division getting a lot of new blood recently, we have a lot of contenders coming and being made known. A lot of different people have really been trying to stake their claim in this division. It's really good to see, because that division has needed some rebuilding for some time now. And this is just a continuation of that saga. Even though Sean Sharif is coming off a loss, once again, I still think that he'll be a decent challenge. But I'm ultimately going with Steven Asplund by first or second round TKO. I think that he'll just be picking his shots a bit better. Despite being a debutant, I'm expecting him to pick his shots better. This is heavyweight. If anybody lands cleanly, they could knock you out. And I do expect Asplund to be the one who lands that. I think that the first round might be a bit of a testing grounds for them both, but I think by the second round, Asplund finds his chin and get him out of there. Moving on, we have my boy Neil Magny versus Yaroslav Amosov. God damn. So we have Neil Magny versus Yaroslav Amosov. This matchup, who do I think wins? I think it's Neil Magny. I've said this in the past. But Neil Magny is absolutely a prospect killer. When you have new upcoming prospects that might have some potential, you send them to Neil Magny, and he either breaks them or they manage to break him and get past him. And then he'll recover and go and check the very next prospect. He's a constant prospect checker. Like, he's the real temperature check for whether or not you're ready for a higher level within the UFC. As far as he's concerned, I don't think that this is going to be another prospect that gets past him, even though their name ends in OV. I think that I don't think Neil Magny is going to dominate any specific element of this. If anything, if he would dominate anything, I'd probably say it would be the striking, but I don't expect a domination at any aspect from Neil Magny. But at this point, he's so experienced and he's so overall well-rounded and skilled that he's able to adjust and adapt his game as it goes on. He's very good at maintaining pace. He's very good at micro adjustments. He's very good at recognizing where he's failing and how to deal with that. If he has to point fight, he can do that. If he sees a finish, he knows he has good finishing instincts. Overall, he's just a really, really, really good checker, especially for prospects who are less experienced, haven't really gone against these higher level opponents as yet, and really sometimes come in really overconfident and cocky against him. The biggest thing for Neil Magny is he is old. Like, just fact of the matter, he's fairly old at this point. He has a lot of wear and tear on his career. Some of the most fights in UFC history, if not, I think he might even hold the record for the most fights, or pretty close to it. So it's like he's had a lot of wars, a lot of battles, a lot of wear and tear in his body. He's not as fast as he once was. He's not as strong as he once was. And the prospects are getting bigger, stronger, and more well-rounded. So while I do say that he's an excellent prospect checker, but it's not going to be a walk in the park for him. Expect him to win. If I had to pick how he'd win, I'd probably say by decision. But he has great finishing instinct. So if the opportunity arises, he'll take it. But once again, he's going to have to be careful because a lot of that wear and tear is beginning to show on him in his fights. With how he moves, sometimes the rate and the time it takes him to adjust and adapt, you're starting to see a lot of these signs. But I still have Neil Magny by decision. Moving on, we have Joanderson Brito versus Isaac Thompson. This one, I got Joanderson Brito. This one time, I'm going against the debutant. I think that Brito, despite not being always having the greatest fight IQ, I still think that Brito just has the more experience and well-roundedness in this matchup. I think Thompson doesn't really necessarily have the tools to handle the onslaught that Brito will bring, as well as the aggression and pace. And then especially coming off a loss, I think Brito is going to be a bit more aggressive trying to get that one back, so to speak. So definitely going to be interesting to see how Isaac Thompson handles this coming in against a more experienced fighter. But I do think Brito basically overwhelms him, gets him out of there in the second or third with a TKO. With this one, once again, this time we're going back to the women's strawweight division. We have Amanda Lemos versus Gillian Robertson. This one, I have Lemos. I think Lemos, by the standards of the strawweight division, is an excellent fighter. My issue with Lemos, personally, is that she spends too much time preparing and or thinking about her shots and shot placements at time as far as striking is concerned. Lemos, a lot of time you can see her thinking through her strikes. She doesn't rely on the skills that she built up a lot of times, and because of that, she ends up throwing a lot slower and a lot less volume at times when she needs more of those things. She's one of those fighters that sometimes takes way too much time with the placement rather than the actual event itself. I think that Gillian Robertson, however, is just a level below Lemos. I don't think that they're in the same category. I think Lemos more or less dominates her as long as she is willing to push that pace and show the levels that I think that she's capable of. Lemos has good power, she has good striking, she has good combinations, but she kind of holds herself back in her fights at times. And a lot of times that can end up being a disservice to her, especially when she goes against somebody who has really solid grappling, which I don't think is Gillian Robertson is this case. Overall, I expect Lemos to more or less put on a bit of a clinic, show a little bit why she was where she was, and manage to get to the ranking that she's achieved, and to kind of just overwhelm and dominate her. I'd probably, on average, I would say with all of this, I'd say a third round finish. But as I said before, Lemos has a big issue with holding herself back. So I wouldn't be surprised if this fight went to a decision or even a close decision, just due to Lemos's own habits of not really fully putting on the force and really turning up the heat at times where she could. Moving on. We have King Green, formerly Bobby Green. We have King Green, formerly Bobby Green. We have him versus Lance Gibson Jr. This one I don't know how to feel, because at one point I would have said, oh, it's Bobby Green. Like, I would have picked Bobby Green. Like, even as far as 3 years ago, I'd pick Bobby Green in this matchup versus Lance Gibson Jr., especially a debutant. The issue with Bobby Green is, as he's gotten older, kind of similar to what I was saying with Neil Magny, who has a lot of wear and tear, Bobby Green also has significant amount of fights. You can see numbers right here. He has that significant amount of fights. He has faced a lot of wear and tear. He's gotten finished a lot of times. And then when you look at this, his style also doesn't give good hopes. His style is very offensive, but it's very defensively void. Like, he lacks solid defense, and he was one of those fighters that overly relied on his speed and accuracy in the past. However, as he's gotten older, a lot of those elements are starting to fade, and his chin is become a lot more susceptible than it once was. He is very at risk when it comes to getting landed on, and then going against a younger fighter who's more determined, it might give him a lot of trouble. I still think that King Green has the skills, capabilities, and experience to actually win this fight. But the issue is, when I said Neil Magny is so well-rounded and is willing to adapt, King Green is not. King Green is kind of I'm going into strike primarily, and I'm either going to knock you out, get knocked out, or barely win. While he does have some jiu-jitsu capabilities, they're rarely shown unless it just is falling right in his lap, i.e. that submission against Tony Ferguson. When you watch him now go against these people where they're getting better at grappling and they're hitting a lot harder and they're moving a lot faster, he kind of just gets flushed. He gets overwhelmed a lot. And we see that in those 17 losses. I.e., I'd probably still say that King Green wins this fight, but I'd probably say he wins it by third round finish if he can land it. But if not, his style is really dangerous. He fights with his hands down, just walking forward. At this stage in his career, that's really not the style you want to approach, especially when you have a susceptible chin by this point. Moving on, we have Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Marcus Buchecha. This matchup, I have Kennedy. Since Kennedy's moved up to the heavyweight division, Kennedy also was one of those prospects as well. I know that Kennedy lost his last fight. However, in general, Kennedy has been a pretty solid prospect. He's had decent striking, overall decent grappling defense, good aggression. He's progressively gotten better since moving up. Kennedy is one of those guys that I think looks good. He doesn't look great. He's not the top prospect on my mind, but he is one of those guys that when he fights, I do pay a little attention to see some of the adjustments he's made. And I think that this will be another situation where we do see him make some adjustments since his last defeat. Marcus Buchecha, On the other hand, I believe is kind of a big puncher. Like, yeah, he got the solid athletic build. You see the abs, but solid athletic build, like good power. But when it comes to overall quality of a combat artist, I don't really see him as being that well rounded. And I know heavyweight, big punchers are kind of the excuse me. And I know heavyweight, big punchers are kind of the name of the game. But still, despite that, I believe that Kennedy Nzechukwu is going to have the better shot placements, the better accuracy. I think he's going to have the faster speed. I think he'll have less power. But as we say all the time, it's heavyweight. Everybody is a knockout threat if they land clean enough. And I think that Nzechukwu is going to be the person who's more likely to land clean. Moving on to the next fight. We have somebody I have my eye on as well, which is Meliquizel Costa versus Morgan Cherreri. I got Costa in this one. Fantastic prospect, been looking pretty good in his last few. He's got excellent timing, fundamentals, and what I've liked in his development recently is the development of patience. He's one of those fighters that by this stage in his career, you see him taking his time more to get to his positions. You see him not necessarily chasing overly. You see him seeing an opponent and really taking the time needed to figure things out. And I love to see those types of micro adjustments in prospects. When it comes to Costa, I think that overall his striking may be maybe not as good as Morgan's, to be honest. I think Morgan's got a lot more power. I think Morgan is more comfortable on the feet than Costa, but I think Costa's striking is still solid. Like, it's dangerous. You can't just walk through it, but his bread and butter is that jiu-jitsu. And I think his jiu-jitsu is really lethal. And I think that Morgan Cherreri is very easy to get a takedown on, in my personal opinion. I think Costa is really just gonna outskill him in this fight. Don't really see it being too difficult for him, at least as of right now. I think if he can avoid getting hit by one of Cherreri's bombs, I think Costa gets him out of there. My opinion, in the first or second round by submission, this goes to a win for Costa. If Cherreri manages to land on him, then Costa goes out, but I don't see that happening as of right now. Moving on, we have a decent matchup in Cesar Almeida versus Cesare Oliscu. That's a crazy last name. But we have Cesar versus Cesare. In this one, I got Cesar Almeida. I think Almeida's striking is very solid. His kickboxing, and I know he's a renowned multiple-time kickboxing champion, but his kickboxing is solid and patient. His timing is good, his striking is good, accuracy is very solid, speed is crazy, and he's good at setting up his kicks. I know that he was a very, very, very anticipated prospect coming in, but for the middleweight, I don't see him being a crazy prospect for the middle, especially the current middleweight, as we've seen a lot of these shifts going on. However, Almeida is very solid. I think he's too much for Cesare. I think his striking is too much. I think that he has good grappling defense as well. Not great. I don't think he has great grappling defense, but he has good grappling defense. I think that's all he needs in this matchup. I think that his striking is going to be better in this one. His accuracy is going to be better. I think his pace is going to be a lot better as well. And I think that his mindset, like when you see him and you see how calm he remains despite a lot of the adversity, I overall just think he's going to overwhelm Alex Truwig. Just let's not try that again. I think he just got to overwhelm Cesare, and I think that he gets him finished in the second or third round via TKO. Moving on, we got another solid matchup with Giga Chikadze versus Kevin Vallejos. I got Chikadze. I know that Georgia's kind of been taking a bit of an L recently with, I know, Marab losing to Peter Yan, and then we have Ilya Topuria having a lot of personal issues going on. Like, we know, and then even we had my boy Fluffy, just Fluffy Hernandez, just taking out and dominating his match again against Dolitze. So I know Georgia's been on a bit of a sliding scale downwards recently. Despite all of that, I think Chikadze gets this done. I think Giga Chikadze's striking is just too much for Vallejos. Now, I know that's a bold prediction because Vallejos has been looking great. Like, recently, Vallejos has been looking great. And I know a lot of people are probably expecting Chikadze to get shredded in this one. But personally, in my opinion, Chikadze is my underdog pick for this card. I think Chikadze's striking gets it done. I think that Chikadze, at the very least, should be able to get a decision victory. I don't see a finish coming for Chikadze. If anything, the finishing potential is probably more on Vallejos' side. But I do believe that between his overall well-roundedness, his grappling defense, and just his strategic mindset, I think that Chikadze is capable of getting this one done by decision. It is going to be a difficult fight for him, though. Vallejos is going to put a lot on him. Vallejos is coming with a lot of aggression, a lot of power, and probably a little bit of arrogance, and thinking that he can kind of walk through Chikadze. But I do think Giga is very capable of winning this matchup. Moving on, we have the main event. So we have number 2, Brandon Royval versus number 6, Manel Kape. Here's the thing about this matchup. This is a fight that has been attempted on multiple occasions. There was always a case where, and it's primarily been on Manel Kape's side, why it didn't happen. He's been injured. He's been pulled out. It's been controversial. It's always something with Manel Kape. But as a fighter, he's a fantastic fighter. He's incredibly fast, incredibly accurate, like very skilled, good, solid takedown defense. Royval himself, on the other hand, has made so much improvements in his game. I know we just saw him lose to Joshua Van, but he basically had a star fight for one of the potential Fight of the Year contenders against Joshua Van, somebody who is believed to be a better striker and harder puncher. And while we did see Royval get dropped, Royval was putting in a lot of work. Overall, I think this is a phenomenal fight. I think it'll be a great matchup for like the height of the division. I think this also presents an opportunity to both of them because, as we know, Alexandre Pantoja, the former champion, got injured with a freak injury at the beginning of his fight against Joshua Van. Due to that, we now have Joshua Van being the champion. Alexandre Pantoja has beaten both of these guys. And Manel Kape was somebody who was kind of being geared to be the next person in line, but then due to his own issues and him pulling out and all of that stuff, he ended up kind of losing that spot to Kai Asakura and Joshua Van. However, with Van now being the champion and Pantoja's freak injury, we not knowing how long it's going to take that to fully recover and heal, this could create an opportunity for both of them to get their opportunity against the title. We already know what's next. What's next for the championship is Van versus Asakura. Whoever wins that, depending on this performance of these two, could potentially be the top contender and top shot. For me, I think if Manel Kape wins, this is going to be an ideal scenario for him. Because Royval has already went against both of these opponents. Royval beat Asakura and lost to Van. So Royval getting that immediate shot that quickly, while it would be justified in the opinions of a lot of people would also say it just happened in both cases. Manel Kape, on the other hand, it would be fresh matchups within the UFC for him. So it would be very interesting. But to get back to the main fight, how do I see this going? I think Royval wins. I think within the current flyweight division, when it comes to skill-wise, I think Brandon Royval is the second best fighter within the flyweight division. I think outside of Alexandre Pantoja himself, Brandon Royval is the best. I know he lost to Joshua Van. However, if Van didn't score that knockdown against him, Royval would have won that fight, in my opinion. I think Royval was beating him when it came down to those last rounds. I think Royval was overall more skilled, overall more experienced, capable of dealing with him. I think Kai Asakura has more natural talent than Royval. However, I think Royval, combining his experience with his well-roundedness, also is able to just outskill Asakura where it counted, outplan him, outstrategize him, and just beat him that way. I think when it comes to the flyweight division, Royval has all the tools he needs to be a champion. I just think that Alexandre Pantoja is just that dominant that nobody else in this current era could really and truly compete with him on that level. And I think the closest thing we have to that is Brandon Royval. I think Brandon Royval gets Asakura down in a rematch, and I generally do believe that in a rematch he'd also be able to beat Joshua Van by just being more wary and avoidant of those direct power shots. My personal opinion, you're free to disagree, but I think that in this matchup, he just overwhelms Kape. I think he's too smart, too strategic, too skilled, too experienced. I think he deals with Kape's speed great, and I think he has. I don't think he has the power that Manel Kape has, but I do believe that he's fully capable of adjusting to it, game planning, and restraining, and holding that at bay. I don't think Kape has the power Joshua Van has, and in that case, I think Royval gets him. I think Royval wins this fight by decision. Wouldn't be surprised if either of them got a finish because, once again, they're both so dynamic when it counts, with a little bit of the dynamicness advantage being given to Kape. But I think Royval gets it done. Overall, though, those are my picks for UFC Fight Night Vegas, the final card of the year. Let me know what y'all think. Drop y'all picks, like, comment, subscribe, and share the video. See y'all next time. Peace.